Hi, Noah here. I was just watching this interview between Joe Rogan and Rick Rubin. Kind of wanting to review it. This happened a couple weeks ago, and um, it's very interesting. Had some good insights onto some things I've been thinking about. I'll give a quick rundown for those of you who don't know who Rick Rubin is. He's a producer, very creative kind of individual. He's kind of had a career out of being kind of a tastemaker, being able to tell which things are going to be popular in the near future. I'm kind of seeing where music is going and moving. He was very influential in the origins of hip hop. Was kind of around that scene really early on and helped bring it into a state that it could reach wide audiences. And yeah, very very interesting. But right here, he'll be talking about his book that he's writing, and the purpose of the book seems to be to help people with creative endeavors, but maybe not necessarily. It's not super clear what his purpose is, but he's kind of just articulating it here. So we'll do that. We won't listen at really fast speeds like I normally do, but
to see if there were principles underlying that could be applied to other things. And that's what the book is. It's all useful tools that have led to good things. That said, nothing in the book's not about me, and there's no example of anything I've made in that book. It's the principles by which the things got made.
So here he's saying, trying not to completely articulate what he just said, but that he's straying away from using like an instantiation of his principles that have led him to success. He wants to abstract the principles so that they aren't so specific, right? I think we see this a lot with any number of things. If anybody gives you advice on something, it tends to stick to their wheelhouse, even though they are able to understand that this has a wider application. They are not able to articulate that very clearly. We have a lot of idioms like that too, but I don't know, the common kind of way I try to articulate it is a fisherman will see everything that they do through the eyes of a fisherman. If they want to make any point about advice during life, they'll say it like a fisherman. They'll say, put your hook in. They'll throw out a cast, right? Like understanding, just go for it. Like put yourself out there, right? These are like metaphors are the wrong word, but these are ways of understanding how to live through the context, through the lens of fishing, because that's what their expertise is in. They know that well. They're able to articulate in that language. Now, how do we abstract that without any knowledge of what the field is extremely difficult. And I think that's what Rubin is trying to kind of butting his head against. He's like, how do I get the principles, these principles that led me to success? How do I say, when I was early on in hip hop, understanding the environment where the music was being played was just as important as the music that was being played. There's you can tell there's something wise in there, but it's lost, right? Because it's not applicable to everything, not even applicable very widely in music. So what is the principle there? Maybe it's something about discernment, being able to recognize this is where the spirit of the music is, or being able to articulate it a little bit better, recognize where your attention is being drawn to. Like these are a little bit broader. You can kind of abstract out a little bit, but the other ones are very lost in the context. And so we'll go into that.
And a
little
way
more.
of looking at the world and a way of being in the world, which is the subtitle of the book, is a way of being. When I started, I thought it was going to be about how to do things. And I realized it's how you live in the world. It's how you see things all the time, 24 hours a day. How you...
Okay. So he draws this distinction. Doing things versus seeing things. It's not like an instruction book. It changes the way you look at things, which is, I think he's getting at something that I've had a hard time articulating in the past, which is what I think it would be like closest to like what scripture is for. What the purpose of scripture is not an instruction book. And I think that's where a lot of atheists tend to get lost. A lot of Christians also get lost, is looking at the Bible and saying, this is a list of things I need to do. But then you start seeing people killing each other, raping, pillaging, and you're like, crap, that's not that's not an instruction booklet anymore. What's going on here? This is a lens in which to see the world, to see the brokenness of this world, and being able to like comprehend and be like, oh, like this is broken. The Bible is supposed to bring a context or a lens in which to view the world that will make sense of it. Because your lens that you have, your cultural lens, will not be enough. That seems to be what the Bible is for. At least from my understanding. And I think this whole search for an instruction booklet for somebody to tell you exactly what you need to do is so lost in the context of where you are. A rule in the 2nd century won't necessarily make sense in your context. A rule in the 2nd century in Corinth won't necessarily make sense in the context of Japan. Like there's like 2nd century Japan. There's not a shared understanding on so many levels. And so the goal is to bridge this gap. And so understanding the principles rather than the what's being said on the paper as an instruction. People often look at the epistles in the same way. They'll say, these are the easiest to understand because they are applied instruction. I was like, well, they are, but are they applied for you? That's a very different question. And I think this is what we should be seeking, whether it's you're a Christian or not, like understanding that we should be seeking the principles, the underlying principles are much more important than being told what to do at any given moment. Being told, like, I don't know, when should I be honest, right? You can ask like anybody and they would probably say, you should be honest all the time. Always tell the truth. And then you can easily think of like, well, in this specific context, lying would lead to the deaths of innocent people. Should I tell the truth? Well, I think the underlying principle is true. Truth is good, but it doesn't mean it needs to be applied equally in every single context. And then we have a question like, what is the principle at play here? How do I balance the principles? How are they correctly ordered? Do I value people's lives over me telling the truth 100% of the time? Or is there a role for deception to save people's lives for a greater good? This is a conversation that can be had. People, like smart people, can disagree, but this is where the conflict is actually happening, not at the level of I say lie, you say no. Like that's not that's not valuable. Let's have a discussion about what do we actually value and where do these compare. Kind of went a little off track there, but
Experience the world is what makes you the artist that you are, or the creative person that you are, and that's what the book.
And he says this too. How do you experience the world? What do you see, not what to do? Your personal experience will change significantly how you see the world. How do we get onto the same page? That's a very difficult question, and it's ultimately not something that I could solve on my own. So he's kind of tackling these huge issues. I'm curious to see what his attempt will look like. His book's not out yet, but I am curious to read it and see. I know he's not writing the Bible or anything, but I do want to see what he makes of this problem.
Shares that information.
Why the bullseye?
It's funny you say it's a bullseye. I mean,
That is a bullseye.
it's to you, it's a bullseye.
Or a reticle.
It's
It's like a dot on a bow sight.
it's the alchemical symbol of the sun. That's one. That's one thing that it is. But it's open to interpretation.
Like many things.
Yeah, like everything.
Yeah.
Like everything.
Now, I think he goes a little far. I think he says it's open to interpretation. This is exactly what he's talking about. He has this symbol in the front of his book, and Joe, through his lens of hunting, is like, oh, this is a target. This is a reticle. Like, this is my interaction with a similar shape. Rubin, a little bit more on the like side of what he's thinking of, is thinking about philosophy, thinking about alchemy, and looking at, oh, this is the alchemical symbol for the sun. Maybe he grew up around those books, both of which are pretty accurate interpretations of what he's trying to do. He's trying to shed light on a subject. He's trying to hit the target, trying to kind of be accurate. These are both, I don't know, sight and light are very heavily linked. And so you could also look at it as an eye, a circle with a dot in the middle. So all of these make sense. He'll say soon about some people see it as a bunch of people sitting around a campfire. Light in the darkness, being able to shine on people, people around the campfire talking. These are all accurate interpretations. But the joke I made in writing beforehand of this is there are such things as bad interpretations. You can have a significant number of correct interpretations because they all can get at the symbol a little bit more in a different way. Some are not accurate, or hopefully not. The comparison I made is if this cover looks like the posterior of an animal, then it's not going to be a correct interpretation of what he's trying to communicate. I don't think he's trying to communicate that this book is crap, but maybe that's what you see, right? Just because you see something doesn't mean it's the case. And so when he says it's all up for interpretation, I think this is the kind of trap we're leading ourselves into, is that there's an old line from a song, which is if everything means anything, there must be so much more for us to mean, or something like that. But this idea that, like, if something can mean anything, then like it's meaningless. There can be a plurality of understanding in it, but something can't mean its opposite. Can't mean the exact polarity of itself. It can't mean simultaneously that this book is supposed to help you understand some principles that helped Rick Rubin out in his life, and also be, this book will lead you to death, right? Like, that's not the purpose of the book. That's not a correct interpretation. If the other one holds to be true, they can't be both simultaneously a correct interpretation. Now, he might say, well, based on your lens, yes, I guess. If one person sees life go one way and one person sees death go the same way, then somebody's confused. But that doesn't change the fact that somebody's confused. It means that one of them is incorrect and one of them is correct. I would make the argument. But let's continue on this journey.
It's an invitation to think about, why is that there? And if you look at the back of the book, so what's that? If the front is a target, what's the back?
The lens, and the target's a dot. I mean, that's how I would look at it. But
Okay, but that's you based on your
Yes.
experience, and that's
For my
also what the
case,
book's about. It's like every
For my case, I'd say if I want to use my incorrect interpretation, that's the mouth, the head of the animal.
thing we do is based on our experience in life.
yeah,
You didn't make up the idea that that's a target. Your experience of life tells you that's a target.
right.
My experience of life is that's the alchemical sun. Someone else's is that's a circle of people sitting around a fire. It's a lot of things.
And I would make an argument that those are all correct. Those are all interpretations that that confirm one another, and whether or not intended, it seems to be communicating and expanding the understanding of the symbol. We'll get into more symbols later, but I think that's important to kind of understand.
But we all see it differently. And the more open we can be to the different interpretations allows us to make better stuff, because we start looking for connections in the world.
So this is where I think he's really getting onto something, is on these connections. In Joe's understanding that this is a target, in Rubin's understanding that this is the sun, and somebody else's understanding that this is a campfire, they are and understanding each other, they're growing in conversation and understanding this symbol. The same can be said of many things, but understanding that your point of view is very influential on your understanding, and simultaneously has something to offer to somebody else, but their understanding is different than yours, and so you also have something to learn from other people and the way that they perceive things. Now, sometimes the perception is incorrect, but the perception is still important. I think this is a trap I fell into as a kid, which was perceptions. They conceal, and they prevent us from seeing what is true. And I think this is the right way of seeing it, is that a plurality of perceptions give a better understanding of a principle or an idea. That I can only get so much of understanding on something on my own. I need another voice in conversation with me. And we'll get into that, actually. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but let him go.
You'll notice something on your drive that doesn't make sense, or someone will recommend something to you that sounds like that's not for you. In the past, when someone would recommend something to me, it sounded like it wasn't for me. It's like, oh, okay. Now, if more than one person recommends something to me that sounds bad, I always check it out.
Okay. So this is an interesting example, is that he says, if more than one person recommends to me something that looks bad, I check it out. Now, how do I say this? That is a very contextual piece of wisdom. in his case, that's what he's found, is that it's worthwhile to check something out if people recommend it to him. But there's a principle there, and the principle is kind of locked away behind it. But you hear it and you're like, okay, I'm starting to get it. How about if you have the same thought 3 times in a day, you should pay attention and take note of it. If you, I don't know, if you see the same storyline playing out in 2 different shows at the same time, you should pay attention to it. Something like that, right? Where it's like noticing patterns. That's kind of the principle. Like paying attention to those around you. Sensing the movement of culture, of these kind of things. This is kind of the principle. And I can only kind of grasp at it. I can't really like hold it, you know? But he put it in a way that contextually makes sense to him. And maybe that makes sense to you too. Maybe you get a lot of recommendations, and if you just paid attention to them and went through with recommendations of your friends, you would have a good time doing whatever you're doing, whether that's advice during work or if that is recommendations of entertainment, of a good story, of a good restaurant. There's a lot of levels to this, but I'm trying to grasp at straws here.
Because like the universe wants me to know about this. The way it tells me is a couple of people came up and said, why don't you check this out?
Okay, so he says the universe wants me to know. Now, this is where I kind of lose Rubin a little bit. What do you mean by the universe? And why does the universe have agency? I think there's a good chance that if Rubin and I were to talk, he would make an argument something like the universe is his image of God, kind of his view of God. And I think that might be an accurate way to translate this. But the universe also has a lot of stuff in it that I don't think I would associate with God and his understanding of the universe. And so I think the way he puts it is almost like the spiritual dimension of the world wants him to know about it. I think that might be a good way of putting it. That the spirits of culture, of music, of narrative, of all these things that are kind of moving around, of American culture specifically, because he's in America. If he was in France, I don't think the spirit of American culture would get close to him. But this idea of like, there are these things in the culture that are moving, that just as he's seen with music, things change. Things seem to have agency in weird ways, but not quite. And so how do we talk about these things? We personify them. And maybe they deserve to be personified and maybe they don't. But you always got to pay attention to them, whether or not you're going to follow, because it's your decision whether or not to follow them or to resist them. And so you should pay attention to them and see where things are moving, because if you don't, you're going to be lost soon. I think that's the thing that most people kind of make fun of older people for, is that they're not paying attention to the culture. That they kind of assume they know the way things are going to be moving, and then when things don't move the way they think they're going to be moving, they seem lost and kind of confused. I think that's something I've heard a lot about a few authors in especially the religious space. I hear about of people who were kind of on the ball, on the money for the kind of movements for their time, but as soon as they kind of stopped paying attention, as soon as they kept writing, they weren't in it anymore, and they're losing their touch on the culture. That's why I think pastors are really good. Anybody who's like on the ground, who's listening to people, they have a good understanding of where people's minds are at if they're paying attention. But as soon as you move out of that space, you'll have a lot of pastors who are just become writers, and that's what all they do. They write all day. But if they don't have their feet on the ground, how do they know these things are happening? Who is recommending to them movies to watch? They're in their own bubbles now, and they lose kind of perception of the world around them. It's also bad to be overconnected. I'd make the argument too. So don't put that all on me, that we all need to be all in the matrix doing everything. Like, no, there's room for both. And there's time to just walk away potentially. So if your goal though is to be understanding of where things are going, and I think it's important, you do have to be connected in a certain amount. And the question is, how do we have a conversation about what we see, and what are we paying attention to?
That's, if we listen to what's going on around us, you can overhear a conversation in a coffee shop, and it is the setup for an idea that you're talking about, the right way to say a particular joke that you're working on. You hear a phrase. It's not a phrase you commonly use. You hear someone else say it. My experience is when you are open and looking for these clues in the world, they're happening all the time, and they're happening often right when you need them. There's a story,
I think it's important to point out this isn't like a pattern, which has a lot to do with the word symbol too. Symbol and pattern are very kind of tightly bound words, but we're seeing a repetition of something that's very important. I'll let him continue.
Song, System of a Down song called, I think it's song Chop Suey, I think. And it has this big, do you know that song?
Mm-hmm.
It has this big bridge section in it where Serge, the lyric writer, the singer, lyric writer, didn't have words for this one part of the song. And we were sitting in the library in my old house, and he said, "What, I don't have words for this." And we were finishing. It's like, okay, any ideas? He's like,
Okay. We're gonna pause for a second just to kind of reflect real fast. But so they're writing the song, and the guy has reached to a point, and he's written the lyrics so far. And he said, "I don't have words for this." Okay, so I know some people think I'm reading into this. I kind of know because I've watched more of this. And we're gonna skip a part, and so I don't want to play the song. But he says, "I don't have words for this." He has an idea of the feeling, there's only a word, feeling, the subjective experience. He knows that, but he doesn't have the words to articulate it. And that's kind of the core of this is, how do you articulate the principle? Like, if we have a hierarchy, right? Everybody has their subjective experience, right? Then the next layer up is like an articulated subjective experience. And as we get closer and closer, we get to something that's a little bit more, like, is more and more objective. But with the objective stuff, it's very difficult to articulate. It's often really vague, and you need to kind of go down a level before you can begin to understand it. Like, this is where like the plurality is at, right? Of like, this is our very well articulated subjective experience. And if we have a plurality of this, we can begin to understand the level that's above, but even that's harder to articulate. So as you go up this hierarchy, you have easily, not easily articulated, but like, this is what we understand the most. And as you go up, you're like, okay, I understand my articulation of my experience. So we'll go at the bottom and we'll be like, okay, it's hard because I'm gonna articulate it, but I'll be like unsettled, angry. Like I saw injustice on the news, right? Then I can articulate it and be like, that this is an unjust society because they did this to an innocent person. Okay, so now we have the feelings, and it's like, this is what's inside of me, and I'm kind of reducing it down, and I'm kind of saying, this is what I think, or this is what I see. And then somebody else says, okay, well, I see it from my side, and I see the injustice. However, I see the injustice that the perpetrators are subjected to as well. You have somebody else who sees something else. They see another layer to it and say, this person was not only treated unjustly for the things that you saw, because now they're recognizing other stuff. What I saw immediately was that they were being mistreated earlier. And so if you have this, we're now developing the complexity of this image of we all have the same stimuli, but we all have different experiences. And then when we articulate them, we get closer to the truth and understanding, like, oh, this is how we understand the situation. Oftentimes, one person's kind of thoughts will dominate. And sometimes that's really good because that leads us closer and we're like, oh, I was mistaken. But there's often times where actually everybody has a little bit, their understanding of it, they might not have all of it, but they're getting closer and they're like, actually, the truth is somewhere in the middle, right? And being able to see where things kind of converge together and being able to understand, like, oh, this is the principle that we see out of this. I want to get more into narrative, but I think that's going too far off topic. They reach it later. I'll probably put that in a second video on Rick Rubin, but we'll just continue here.
He didn't have any ideas, and I said, okay, pick a book off the wall. I picked a book randomly off the wall. I said, open it to any page. Tell me the first phrase you see. He opened it. First phrase he sees. That's what's in the song, and it's a high point in the song. It's incredible. It's like magic.
What was it?
It's the part farther unto your hands you have it.
Why have you forsaken me? That part.
Yeah.
I'll try to...
Okay, so this part just blew my mind because I'm sitting here and I'm like listening to this, and these things are kind of coming into my mind, and I'm articulating things that I thought about when I first listened to this, and I heard this and I was like, oh, like, pulls a random book off the wall. What does he pull off the wall? I'm gonna spoil it now. I'm not gonna play the song because they're gonna play it, but it's the Bible. He plays the Bible, or he picks up the Bible, and he turns to a random page. Is it random? But he turns to an account of the crucifixion of Christ, and it's Christ saying on the cross, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, my God, why have you forsaken me? Now, okay, so the song is all about disconnection, about feeling rejected by God himself. The whole song is about this. And so, like, one could say it's a crazy coincidence that he flipped to the exact book, the best articulation of that idea that I could possibly think of. Man, that's such a coincidence. That's a weird coincidence. I'm like, I don't think our world works like that. I don't think we have people doing that and then things, this song becomes a huge hit. Like, this is a very famous song. It doesn't make sense to say that this is just a coincidence. I would make an argument. This is symbolism moving in the real world. The patterns are playing out here in a very interesting way. but also you know it's not random as well, because there's no way they just turned and they were like, I can turn to a random page of the Bible and be like, oh, I'm reading it. Well, no, he definitely read part of the page, and so there's this kind of participation of both sides of like, how much is our culture as in American culture, kind of Protestant-y, vaguely something, how is that affecting these artists who I'm sure would not consider themselves Christian? How do they interact? Because this artist is picking up one of the most significant books. Right? What put the book on Rick Rubin's shelf, right? Well, that's the culture. And it probably led him to do the same. Pick up the book that looks nice. It has the gold lettering on the side or whatever. He picks it out and he reads it, and like so it seems like there are forces that are putting it into his hand in some way, whether for good or evil or for whatever. You can put your own mind on it, but and he's reading it, and if he reads something boring, there could have been a chance he picked up a different book and was like, this is just a textbook. Like, he's not going to read out of a textbook for a song, right? That would be stupid. Like, screaming in the bridge, like, the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. Like, nobody would think that. Like, actually, a lot of people would think that's really cool, but that wouldn't fit the song. So he's reading, and he's obviously reading to a point, and he's like, oh, this line connects with what I'm thinking about. And so the connection is made. Then we see that this is not just random. This is now a collaboration, which Rubin will begin to define and stuff. This is a collaboration between something and this artist. Now, one could make the argument this is the collaboration of the artist and culture, and being like, the culture and its feelings are kind of being, he's now a conduit for the feelings of this culture, which I think might be one very good way of understanding this. Somebody else could say, but God put nothing bad, or not nothing bad, but like God put this book in his hands and all this stuff. I don't think this song is a very Christian song. I think this song is a very cultural song, in saying it's a very mourningful song about how broken we are. But all of that's to say is that we're in this collaboration territory here. That what Rubin's talking about is participating with spirits. If you want to use that word, you can use something that's a little bit more secular if it makes you feel more comfortable, but they're now participating, and the best way would be that this person's like an oracle now, that this is kind of what art is being sensitive to these movements of culture and the way things work, and they're able to articulate these feelings that they kind of feel pressed onto them, and allow people to connect to them. So, yeah. Let me look at my notes, make sure I didn't miss anything. 2:56:35. So let's
I think it's right here.
It's wild. Play it from a little before, so you see the context. It doesn't really make sense in what's going.
Okay. So here's the song they're playing. Okay, so it ends. Oh, let me
Okay. I get chills.
Yeah.
So cool.
It is so cool. So when you start writing, and you decide that you're going to do this, are you writing longhand? Are you sitting in?
But so that draws an end to this kind of section. What do I make of this? I think Rubin is starting to introduce here an idea that I'm going to go into further, but this idea of collaboration, understanding symbols, and like how important symbols are to understanding the world. This right here is just a really good articulation of how important symbols are. That, and in a weird way, I'm losing articulation of this idea, but that there's something else going on here. Like he's very much out of the realm of any scientists talking about these kind of things. Like this is kind of the realm of anthropology, maybe the realm of psychology closer. But I'd argue now we're reaching into more religious territory. Like this is where we have powers and principalities discussions and all of this about how does art by what methods does art move in the culture? What is art? What is it for? Like these are kind of really important things, and they're kind of confusing. And so this is my attempt to kind of like understand it better by talking to you all. If you have any thoughts, let me know. If you know me, contact me and just ask me and help me to understand this too. And if you don't know me, just comment below and ask questions. Please give your comments on things. I want to better understand this, and so this is my attempt. I'm gonna make another video on the second part of this, and then I'll probably make one last third video on this conversation. So I had a little bit more time, and so I'm just gonna pick up from later on in the conversation, kind of getting closer to this collaboration aspect of the conversation, and then we'll probably do one last video on Rick Rubin's love of WWE. I think that'll be a fun one, and about that. But we'll stick to collaboration for now. We'll pick up here.
Collaboration, and you would think collaboration is about working with other people. That's not what that section of the book's about. So
right here he begins to draw a distinction between what he's talking about with collaboration. Just saying it's not about working with other people. It's about something more than that. And so
if I were to do it just based on the word, I would probably go to collaborating with other people. But when I knew the context, it would be different, because what collaborating is about is we're always collaborating at all times with the universe. That's how it works. Like we're taking in information.
No, I would make a distinction that the universe not as an entity, but as when he talks about the universe, he kind of leans towards more of a spiritual kind of aspect of understanding the universe, that we have a lot of players kind of going at once. At least that's my interpretation. That there's a lot of things vying for your attention, a lot of things that are trying to influence you. And again, there's no, like, I don't want to put any judgments on like whether they're influencing you for bad or for good, but certainly there are things that are influencing you for bad, and there's things that are good influences on you. And so what do you pay attention to? Video games are there that you could always play. You could always watch a movie. You could always pay attention to your family, spend time with your family. Like, what is going to take up your time? are you going to go and pray? Or are you going to, I don't know, play with your son? Or like there's so many things that you can do. It's beyond comprehension. And so, what are the mechanisms that we're making these decisions? He says it's this level of collaboration. Like, what are we working with? So
we're
go on here.
Vibing on it. I'm looking at this skull, and I'm looking at the teeth, and then if I were to say something about it, it wouldn't be. It's like it's not really my thought about this. I can say, oh, it's cold. It's this piece. I'm collaborating with this piece to understand something, or to have a point of view into something. So the collaboration section is about how we're always collaborating with everything we've ever learned.
I feel like that was a really weak articulation of Rubin. I think he might get better, but something like using the lens of these kind of lenses that we're given, and understanding the world through these lenses. Understanding that, like, man, I'm sounding really postmodern. I don't want it to be postmodern. I want to distinguish this a little bit, but understanding, like, the way I see the world as a Christian versus the way I see the world as an American, being able to understand, like, these differences are important, and kind of moving with them. Might need to sit on this a little bit as we
our lives.
Kind of go.
You were collaborating with bow hunting by seeing a target. That's a collaboration with something you've learned. If you never bow hunted or never shot anything, I don't think that would seem like a target to you.
No.
If you were an eye doctor, I guarantee you wouldn't think of it as a target.
Right.
And so I think as we kind of spend time in these things that kind of stretch us, we get a greater knowledge of the world. He says, as an eye doctor, I'm guarantee you wouldn't see it as a target. If you spend your time looking at eyes all day, you're going to see an eye. But when I collaborate with something else outside, I stretch my understanding out. I begin to get a wider view of the world. And it gets me more insight because I have another perspective. I think there's a common kind of articulation of the way God is like a complex diamond. I think this is like the way that it gets put, because I think God is the most, not complex, but God has facets. And understanding those is very difficult. Like, from my perspective, I see God in this way. I see his justice above all. Where somebody else, they might look and they're like, actually, I see the mercy side much more. And a lot of that plays out through the way you live your life, right? If you've lived life in a way where you've been the victim of crimes against you, you're going to want to see God in a justice way. Whereas if you see somebody, if you've been the perpetrator of a lot of horrible things to other people, you're going to see God potentially in a merciful way, if you're a repentant Christian. And so understanding that the way I see not just God but the world is not entirely it. That I'm almost like I'm looking through the world through a single eye. It has no depth, right? It has no depth. It's devoid of any kind of anything beyond the surface level. But if I get closer in, I begin to see, or if I get multiple views, I can begin to see the picture better. The picture's going to look totally different from this angle versus this angle. And so I get a broader perspective. I get a more interesting perspective. I think these are all kind of things that we should consider.
So we're always like
oh,
how
I'm
we're in
copying
the
same-
world impact
I'm copying the same hand gestures. I'm noticing.
how we see everything. Then there's another section in the book called cooperation, and that's about working with other people. And that section's about, having worked with a lot of bands, I see that there's often this friction where, and I'm sure you've seen it in a writing room for comedy, where people are trying to get their idea in.
Yeah.
That's not a collaboration.
No.
It's something else.
Well, it would be something like, if you're not willing to take the other views in, you're reinforcing your own view, and you are limiting the scope on purpose. Maybe that view is helpful, is pragmatic for the moment. But I think we always would prefer a more dynamic view of a dynamic understanding of a situation, because that gives us the correct kind of perspective. But sometimes kind of aspects can be missing, and so we can reinforce one way more than the other. And sometimes that's helpful, and sometimes that's not. I'm not going to dig too much into this, but
A real collaboration is when everyone who's there is working together towards whatever is the best thing for the whole thing.
Yeah.
And whether it's your idea or someone else's idea, it doesn't matter. And if you're invested in the collaboration, you want the best idea to win. You don't want your idea to win.
Right.
And so it's just...
Yeah, the question is, what's the goal? What are we shooting for? Do we want to... am I trying to reinforce what I believe and my perception of things, or am I trying to understand it? Am I trying to actually develop understanding and knowledge? This is kind of getting back to wisdom, right? But if my goal is just to reinforce my own beliefs and to put them on other people, then I've kind of lost the plot. It's if something is rightly centered in wisdom, then you are going to kind of process everything in discernment and say, like, well, this is what you told me. Let me weigh this out. Understand what parts of it I can keep and what parts I reject. That is what, like, an intelligent person does. And that's kind of something that we need to learn again.
Things that you can, things to watch out for, and habits you can develop that'll make you better at working with other people in that section, for example.
So when you got the first version, which you said was great prose, but there was something missing, whatever that was, how did you make that determination, and why did you decide to try again?
I read it and I felt how it made me feel.
And this is something interesting. Rubin is a very intuitive thinker. He kind of has talked about through this entire interview what feels right. Our feelings can be deceptive, but in certain ways, Rubin is very sensitive to these movements of understanding intuitively, oh, this is where something is moving, this is where that's moving. And so being able to rely on his intuition as part of his career is saying, like, that person doesn't feel like they have it, where this person, even though they might be a little bit unrefined, they might be where this is kind of moving. And so just kind of trusting in the process. Yeah, it's all about collaboration, and that's very clear from the way he kind of lives his life. And then we kind of have to ask, what role does collaboration have in the way I live my life, or your life, or any of our lives? How does this impact the way I see the world? And I think it's a question for another time, just kind of digging in more. Yeah. Well, thank you for listening along. I'll try to put up another one on this conversation soon. Sorry, it's been a little bit since I posted again, but thank you for sticking around.